Listen to part of a conversation between a student and a professor.
Excuse me, are you very busy right now?
Not at all. Come on in.
I wanted to talk to you about my paper. I have a big problem.
Oh, really? The paper that's due tomorrow? I suppose you're looking for an extension?
Well...
Look, I know you're probably very busy, and maybe you've got 2 other papers due on the same day, or maybe you have 3 midterms. I've heard it all before, okay? The fact is, you've known about this paper for 6 weeks. If you left everything until the last minute, you're just going to have to live with the consequences. I take off 2 points per day.
I didn't leave anything to the last minute. My paper was finished and it was saved on my laptop. Last weekend my roommate had a party and somebody stole my laptop. I can tell you all about the paper. I'm just going to need some time to write it up again.
Oh, I see. Well, that's very unfortunate. You should always keep an extra copy of everything that you have on your computer.
Yeah, I know.
Did you, report it to the police?
Yes, I have the police report right here, if you don't believe me.
Oh, that won't be necessary. Why don't you just tell me a little bit about your paper?
Sure, no problem. What I did was I basically outlined the history of psychology going back to the Middle Ages. I tried to show how society's definition of what is normal or abnormal has changed drastically over time. It's also different in different cultures. Then I showed how abnormal behavior gets defined as mental illness. Now, I think the problem with that is that something that was considered abnormal 30 years ago might be considered perfectly normal today.
Yes, I think I can think of a few good examples.
Oh, yeah, there are tons. So now we look back and say, no, those people were not mentally ill. Well, are we making the same mistakes today? So, what I was trying to say in the paper is that, the way that we study and treat mental illness is problematic.
How so?
Well, we treat mental illness like it's a disease. However, we are talking about behaviors, and if one behavior is abnormal in one culture but perfectly normal in another, how can we call it a disease?
That sounds like a very interesting paper. I look forward to reading it. Do you think you can get it to me in a week?
A week? That shouldn't be any trouble at all. Thank you so much.
Not to worry. Sorry, I was so hard on you when you first came in. I should have listened to what you had to say before I jumped to any conclusions.
I understand. You probably have students asking you for extensions all the time.
Yes, it gets a little trying. It seems like no matter how much notice I give to students, there are always a handful that come in the day before the paper is due, looking for an extension.
Well, thank you for being so understanding. I'll get the paper to you within a week.
I look forward to it. And good luck getting your computer back.
Thanks.
Now get ready to answer the questions. You may use your notes to help you answer. Number 1. Why does the woman go to see her professor? Number 2. What is the woman's problem with her paper? Number 3. What was the woman's paper about? Listen again to part of the conversation. Then answer the question.
Oh, really? The paper that's due tomorrow? I suppose you're looking for an extension?
Well...
Look, I know you're probably very busy, and maybe you've got 2 other papers due on the same day, or maybe you have 3 midterms. I've heard it all before, okay?
Number 4. What can be inferred about the professor? Listen again to part of the conversation. Then answer the question.
Yes, I have the police report right here, if you don't believe me.
Oh, that won't be necessary. Why don't you just tell me a little bit about your paper?
Number 5. Why does the professor say this?
Oh, that won't be necessary. Why don't you just tell me a little bit about your paper?
Listen to part of a lecture in an anatomy class.
You know how turkey has white meat and dark meat? Well, so do people. Okay, we don't call it meat when we're talking about people. We call it muscle. But that's exactly what you're eating when you eat turkey, the muscle. Personally, I like the dark meat, that is, the red muscle, that, as I'm sure you know, comes from the legs. The white meat, or muscle, on the other hand, comes from the breast and wings. Okay, so that's how the muscle types are distributed in turkeys. Eagles now are the opposite. Their chest and wing muscles are red, and their leg muscles are white. Not that I've ever eaten eagle. Anyway, what can we conclude from that difference in the color of these birds' muscles? Think about the lifestyles of the turkey and of the eagle. Think about what they use their muscles for. Okay, for one thing, the turkey doesn't fly much. When it does fly, it's in short bursts, like maybe to escape a predator. And it's got white muscle in the breasts and wings. On the other hand, it walks and runs around a lot, and it's got red muscles in the legs. The eagle, conversely, flies a lot and only walks in short bursts. And again, it has dark meat in the chest and white meat in the legs. That tells us something about the use of different kinds of muscles for different kinds of activities. Now, here's the science of it. Okay, so we know that white muscle is good for short bursts of energy, like when the turkey has a short stint at flight, and we know that red muscle is good for sustained use, like when an eagle goes soaring over the sea in search of prey. Now, let's look at the composition of the different types of muscle and see why they are so well suited to their purposes. First of all, muscles need oxygen to work, and muscles that are constantly in use need more oxygen. For this reason, these muscles have something called myoglobin. Myoglobin is a kind of protein molecule that stores oxygen. Muscles that are used continuously for standing and walking around have a lot of myoglobin. Incidentally, it's the myoglobin that gives it its dark color. And, as you might guess, the white muscle does not have myoglobin. These muscles are used briefly, and then the animal gets tired out. That's because it doesn't have a steady supply of oxygen going to these muscles. So you might be wondering where the red and white muscles are in humans. Basically, most people have about 50% white muscle and 50% red muscle, and it's all interspersed throughout the body. That makes sense when you think about human behavior. Most of the muscles that we use for short bursts of energy are the same as the ones we use constantly. Take our legs. We use them to stand and walk. These are slow, continuous movements, so we would expect to have red muscle there. On the other hand, we also use them to sprint, so we need to have white muscle in there as well. Speaking of sprinting, notice how I said most people have a 50-50 ratio of red muscle to white muscle? There's actually a lot of variation between people. Now, knowing what you know about white muscle and red muscle, what would you expect to find if you looked at the muscles of different types of runners? Would a sprinter's muscles be different from a long-distance runner's muscles? Yes, indeed. It turns out that sprinters tend to have more white muscle than red muscle. Conversely, long-distance runners tend to have more red muscle than white muscle. Now, it's possible to change your ratio of red to white muscle through athletic training. It's possible to change it a little, but you really can't alter it that much. Scientists currently believe that there's a genetic component involved.
Now get ready to answer the questions. You may use your notes to help you answer. Number 6. What is the talk mainly about? Number 7. How does the professor introduce the two different types of muscles? Number 8. Which of the following is not mentioned as a difference between white muscles and red muscles? Number 9. According to the professor, how are turkey and eagle muscles different? Listen again to part of the lecture. Then answer the question.
Speaking of sprinting, notice how I said most people have a 50-50 ratio of red muscle to white muscle? There's actually a lot of variation between people. Now, knowing what you know about white muscle and red muscle, what would you expect to find if you looked at the muscles of different types of runners?
Number 10. Why does the professor say this?
Speaking of sprinting, notice how I said most people have a 50-50 ratio of red muscle to white muscle? There's actually a lot of variation between people.
Number 11. What does the professor imply when he says this?
Now, it's possible to change your ratio of red to white muscle through athletic training. It's possible to change it a little, but you really can't alter it that much. Scientists currently believe that there's a genetic component involved.
Listen to part of a talk in a music appreciation class.
Okay, so that was a piece called Maple Leaf Rag by Scott Joplin. It's easily identifiable as ragtime music. Now, before we discuss the piece, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the history of ragtime music. Okay, it was sort of a precursor to jazz music, and it became popular in the late 19th century and the early 20th century. Like jazz, it originated with West African musical traditions. See, unlike European American music, African American music tended to use complex rhythms, and it's noted for exploring different kinds of rhythms. So ragtime was invented in African American communities, and it was particularly influenced by the experiences of African slaves. Now, as you know, even after slaves in America were emancipated, there weren't a lot of opportunities for African Americans to make a decent living. Most had to settle for menial labor. However, employment as a musician was a somewhat viable opportunity for African Americans, because in spite of the country's racist attitudes, Black musicians contributed in a huge way to American popular music. Okay, so let's define ragtime, shall we? What did you notice about the piece?
The big thing was the syncopated rhythm. While the left hand was playing a pretty steady bass line, the right hand was kind of all over the place.
That's actually where some people think ragtime gets its name. It's from the syncopated or sort of ragged rhythm. To syncopate the rhythm is to change a beat that would normally be expected to be unstressed and change it to a stressed or accented beat. Want an example? Think of it like this. Say you have 4 beats in a measure of music. Now, a lot of times the rhythm goes like this. Beat, 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 beat. The stressed beats are the odd-numbered beats. 1, 2, 3, 4. If you take that measure of music and stress the back beats, I mean those even-numbered beats, that's a form of syncopation. Like this. Beat, 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 beat. Get it? There are other forms of syncopation, but that's not really the focus of the lecture today, okay? So what musicians are doing when they're syncopating music is they're changing the emphasis on certain beats. That's really the defining feature of ragtime music. Now, as I said, ragtime is not jazz, but it was a precursor to the style. Is there anything about the music that you find similar or dissimilar to jazz?
Well, the syncopated rhythm is used a lot in jazz. I guess it's like when ragtime musicians would rag a piece. They take a piece of music and give it a syncopated rhythm, which made it a little more jazzy. So that's obviously a similarity between ragtime and jazz. I guess that's related to what you were saying about the complex rhythms in African music.
That's right. The syncopated rhythm was an important contribution to jazz music. What did you notice that was different from jazz?
It was pretty clear that this song wasn't improvised, am I right? Whoever was playing that piece was reading it from sheet music?
That's right. Before jazz, Western music was normally composed and replayed exactly as it was originally composed. So yes, that's one way that ragtime differed from jazz. Jazz basically took ragtime and started improvising and got rid of the rigid formula. What else?
Well, Maple Leaf Rag was just a piano. When I think of jazz, I picture a lot of different instruments. I think with jazz, you usually get bands.
Right. Ragtime was typically performed on piano, solo, though there were bands who played it as well. Now, as you might guess, there were different types of ragtime pieces. Let's listen to a couple of other styles of ragtime music.
Now get ready to answer the questions. You may use your notes to help you answer. Number 12. What is the talk mainly about? Number 13. How does the professor explain syncopation? Number 14. Indicate whether each of the following describes ragtime, jazz, or both. Click in the correct box for each phrase. Number 15. According to the professor, how did ragtime music differ from jazz music? Listen again to part of the lecture. Then answer the question.
That's actually where some people think ragtime gets its name. It's from the syncopated or sort of ragged rhythm.
Number 16. Why does the professor say this?
Or sort of ragged rhythm.
Listen again to part of the lecture. Then answer the question.
Get it? There are other forms of syncopation, but that's not really the focus of the lecture today, okay?
Number 17. What can be inferred about the professor? Listen to part of a conversation between two students.
Hey, Jula, are you going to the student council meeting tonight?
Oh, that's right. It's tonight, isn't it?
Right. It's that time again. It's already the third Tuesday of the month.
I feel like we had a student council meeting just last week.
I know. This time of year always flies by. Anyway, I was asking to see if you're going to the student council meeting tonight because I was hoping you might be able to take notes for me or something. I mean, if you're planning to go.
Oh, I wasn't planning on attending a meeting tonight. I guess maybe I could go. But my economics exam is tomorrow.
Oh, that's right. I remember you talking about your upcoming exam.
I can't remember what's on the agenda for tonight's meeting. Are they going to be talking about fundraising events again? 'Cause if it's just going to be 2 hours of fundraising planning like it was last month, I don't think I can spare the time.
Last month's meeting was really boring, wasn't it?
It really was. I mean, I enjoy volunteering at the actual events, but all the planning that goes into it, I have to admit I'm not very interested in that aspect of it.
Actually, though, I know that fundraising events aren't on the agenda tonight. It's the annual budget meeting. They're outlining the budget for next year. I really don't want to miss out on that information.
Oh, that is pretty important. I should try to go, I guess. Although it depends on what time the meeting's at. I doubt that I could stay for all of it.
Yeah, even if you can only catch the beginning or the end, that would be really great.
Well, what time is the meeting? Do you know?
I'm pretty sure it's at 7:30.
Oh, I'd still be in my study meeting. I really can't miss it. Our professor is hosting a review session, and I have some questions that I've really got to talk to her about.
Okay, I understand.
Sorry about that.
No, don't worry. It's not a big deal.
Hey, wait, I have an idea.
What?
You know that girl who just moved into the room at the end of my hall?
Oh, yeah. With the short brown hair?
Right. I think her name is Clarice.
Okay, so what are you thinking?
Well, I remember seeing her at the last student council meeting.
Oh, great. She's on the student council?
Well, I think so. Do you remember when they introduced the people who had joined the student council during the past semester? I think she was one of the people that was introduced.
Now that you mention it, I might remember seeing her there.
Well, we could ask her if she's going to the meeting tonight. Maybe she'd be willing to fill us in on what we miss.
That's a good idea, and we'll be able to get to know Clarice a little better.
Yeah, let's go see if she's at the dorm.
Oh, I can't right now. I have to head over to main campus. I have a chemistry lab.
When do you finish?
It's one of the long ones. I won't be done for 3 hours. Around 6:30.
Well, I guess we can't meet up then. I'll be in my review session.
Don't worry. I'll just try and catch up with Clarice after my lab. There's a chance that she'll be in her room around then.
Actually, why don't I head over to the dorm now? I have some time before my next class. If she's not in her room, I'll just leave a note on her door. Hopefully she'll see it before 7:30 tonight.
Sounds great. Thanks for your help.
Now get ready to answer the questions. You may use your notes to help you answer. Number 18. What do the two students mainly discuss? Number 19. Why is the woman unable to attend the meeting at 7:30? Number 20. Why does the woman suggest speaking to Clarice? Listen again to part of the conversation. Then answer the question.
Hey, Jula, are you going to the student council meeting tonight?
Oh, that's right. It's tonight, isn't it?
Number 21. What can be inferred about the woman? Listen again to part of the conversation. Then answer the question.
I was hoping you might be able to take notes for me or something. I mean, if you're planning to go.
Oh, I wasn't planning on attending a meeting tonight. I guess maybe I could go. But my economics exam is tomorrow.
Number 22. What does the woman mean when she says this?
Oh, I wasn't planning on attending a meeting tonight. I guess maybe I could go. But my economics exam is tomorrow.
Listen to part of a lecture in a media class.
A news agency is an organization that collects news reports and distributes them to newspapers. Some of the bigger news agencies are Reuters or the Associated Press. You've probably seen news articles from these agencies. Today we're going to talk about the different types of news agencies and how they arose. The early 19th century saw big changes in the ways that people worked. Jobs became more and more specialized, and news reporting was no exception. Before this time, a person in the newspaper business would be involved in the entire process. They'd write the story, edit it, and print it all themselves. Some of these stories came from correspondents who didn't work for the paper at all. But in the early 19th century, newspapers began to expand, which required more job specialization. The need arose for full-time reporters, and by, the news reporter became a highly esteemed person in society. Of course, it costs a lot of money to employ a full-time staff of news reporters, and some of the smaller papers couldn't keep up. Newspapers needed to pool their resources. The invention of the telegraph in 1838 proved to be just what they needed. Let me back up a minute here. A few years before that, there was a man in France who sort of initiated the idea. His name was Charles Havas, and he ran a translation company. What he did was he translated stories from all the major European papers to be sold to other papers. For example, he might take an article written in German, translate it into French, and sell it to a French newspaper. That way, the newspapers wouldn't have to send reporters abroad to get their stories. One of his employees, Paul Julius Reuter, recognized the name. Well, he was very interested in the telegraph, and in 1851 he opened a telegraph service in London. That company eventually got involved in selling foreign telegrams to the press. It's the same idea. Instead of having every newspaper send reporters all over the world, they could buy stories. Conversely, they could sell your stories as well. Today, Reuters is one of the world's largest news agencies. Now, in America, the story is a little different. A lot of the impetus for setting up agencies in Europe was the fact that you had so many nations speaking different languages in close proximity to one another. In the States, though, language wasn't a problem, except, of course, with international news. Still, the country was vast, and people were also interested in getting news from Europe, where there were revolutions going on, and also Mexico, where there was a war. There was talk that some of the telegraph companies were going to set up services similar to Reuters, where they would take much of the profits in the news industry. By the way, Reuters hadn't been established at this point, but it looked like the American news industry was heading in that direction. So there was a big incentive for the newspapers to pool their resources and create a cooperative. So in 1848, 6 of the main newspapers in New York got together and formed a cooperative news agency called the Associated Press. Remember, the AP was different from Reuters in that it was a cooperative. Reuters began as a telegraph service, and it got into the news business later. The Associated Press began as a way for newspapers to work together to get news from far-off places. It was pretty weird for these rival papers to start working together, but in the end, they did protect their own collective interests.
Now get ready to answer the questions. You may use your notes to help you answer. Number 23. What is the talk mainly about? Number 24. How did the newspaper business change in the early 19th century? Number 25. What was the role of Charles Havas's company? Number 26. How did the Associated Press come to be? Number 27. What does the professor imply when he says this?
One of his employees, Paul Julius Reuter, recognized the name.
Listen again to part of the lecture. Then answer the question.
There was talk that some of the telegraph companies were going to set up services similar to Reuters, where they would take much of the profits in the news industry. By the way, Reuters hadn't been established at this point, but it looked like the American news industry was heading in that direction.
Number 28. Why does the professor say this?
By the way, Reuters hadn't been established at this point.
Listen to part of a talk in an astronomy class.
Okay, folks, so we've been talking a lot recently about the Big Bang, the scientific theory of how our universe began. But you know, one thing that always seems to happen in our quest for knowledge is that the more we learn, we realize how little we know. That's a nice little paradox, right? Well, this is just as true in our study of space. We've developed highly sophisticated technology for looking at the universe, telescopes, satellites, robotic explorers, and yet, a lot of times, all these things have done is show us how wrong our old theories were. Today, we're going to talk about a discovery that that really shook up our ideas of how the universe was constructed, how the universe evolved from the beginning. In other words, this discovery really changed our understanding of the Big Bang. So, this didn't come about too long ago. It was 1987, in fact. What happened was astronomers discovered a huge group of galaxies that were all kind of lumped together, something that we now call a supercluster of galaxies. Actually, our very own Milky Way galaxy is a part of this supercluster. But there are literally millions of galaxies in the cluster. It's immense. And so, the discovery of the supercluster really changed our conception of how galaxies form, and, well, how the universe itself is put together. Can anyone think of a reason why the discovery of superclusters would have had this effect? No? Well, okay. Who can tell me about the Big Bang?
It's the theory that the universe came into existence about, 10, 20 billion years ago? That there was a gigantic explosion and the whole universe expanded, or really is still expanding, outward from that explosion.
Right. So, why would the discovery of a supercluster, a huge gathering of millions of galaxies, why would that be so unsettling? What did the original Big Bang theory assume about the way the universe expands?
Well, I'm not sure if this is right, but didn't we think that the rate of expansion, all the stuff in the universe, like galaxies and stars and planets and all that matter, that it expands at a steady rate, that it was all distributed, pretty evenly?
Yeah, exactly. So, all of a sudden, with the discovery of superclusters, our model of a smooth, balanced universe was out the window. Our theories hadn't predicted a structure like this, so it meant we had to go back to the drawing board in some respects and figure out how to account for these superclusters.
I'm sorry. So you're saying that the universe's rate of expansion really isn't, uniform?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. The discovery of superclusters proved this, that the matter in the universe has not spread out at a constant pace. In other words, some areas of the universe have dense clumps of stars and galaxies, and others don't. So, we now know that something, some force or event, must be interfering with that smooth expansion rate that scientists had theorized. So now the problem is, what's doing it? Well, let me just say that there are plenty of recent theories that try to tackle this problem. One is all about the gravitational forces of so-called dark matter. Another one involves the string theory of physics, which is really complex. The specifics of these theories aren't important, but you should understand that, actually, none of the new theories can completely explain why the universe grows at an inconstant rate. So, what I really want you to get out of today's class is that the discovery of superclusters showed us that our models of the universe and its creation have many flaws. A lot of our ideas about the Big Bang were incorrect. And the thing is, we still haven't come up with a theory that explains them. The clumps of matter, these massive, mysterious structures called superclusters.
Now get ready to answer the questions. You may use your notes to help you answer. Number 29. What is the talk mainly about? Number 30. How does the professor introduce the subject matter of the lecture? Number 31. Which concept from the lecture is most concerned with the origin of the universe? Number 32. What does the professor say about superclusters? Number 33. What does the professor imply about string theory? Listen again to part of the lecture. Then answer the question.
One is all about the gravitational forces of so-called dark matter. Another one involves the string theory of physics, which is really complex. The specifics of these theories aren't important, but you should understand that, actually, none of the new theories can completely explain why the universe grows at an inconstant rate.
Number 34. What does the professor mean when he says this?
The specifics of these theories aren't important.
This is the end of Side A.